With the admission of Morocco into the African Union as of January 30th, 2017, the AU now consists of all 55 countries on the continent. Based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the main goals of the African Union are to promote the unity and solidarity of African states, ensure their sovereignty and territorial integrity, rid the continent of colonialism and apartheid, and promote international cooperations with the United Nations through a unified voice of common political, social, and economic policies. Although the African continent has suffered through an incredibly turbulent and violent past, the African Union is emerging as a promising platform to tackle the many issues that face the rapidly growing continent. My name is Nathan, and welcome to Caspian Report. One of the first major steps toward a unified Africa took place in 1945 at the 5th Pan-African Conference in Manchester. An influential voice of modern Pan-Africanism was that of Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, who at the conference advocated for a United States of Africa. Although the idea did not gather widespread appeal at the time, it did help pave the way for the creation of the African Union's predecessor, the Organization of African Unity, nearly 20 years later in 1963, in which Nkrumah played a vital role. Although aspirations were high at uniting a continent so violently divided by colonialism, the first years of the OAU gave little hope to maintaining peace. In order to make the organization a reality, it needed to appeal to the many African autocrats who were fiercely defensive of their post-colonial independence and who were not keen on the idea of sharing any sort of power with their neighbors. This resulted in the OAU placing emphasis on state sovereignty and adopting a widespread policy of non-intervention of domestic issues, which was ineffective and virtually indifferent towards maintaining peace and stability or defending human rights. A prime example of the ineffectiveness of the OAU was the failure to resolve the conflict over Western Sahara, which has been in dispute since 1975 after separating from Spain. The territory, which was claimed by both Morocco and the Algerian-backed Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, or SADR, led to a 15-year-long war over control of the region. The initial years of the war lacked any cohesive attempt from the OAU in forming concrete proposals for a resolution to the conflict. The situation deteriorated further when in 1982, the OAU formally recognized and admitted the SADR as a member, causing Morocco to withdraw from the organization in protest. It was not until 1991, when the United Nations took a greater role in the crisis, that a ceasefire was finally established. However, progress has recently been made with the readmission of Morocco to the African Union, which represents a major step towards resolving the Western Sahara dispute and is a sign that the AU is becoming a more effective platform for dialogue and cooperation. One of the key shifts in the transition from the OAU to the African Union was that the AU aimed to become a force for democracy and abandon its past tendency to be, as BBC referred to the OAU, a dictator's club. African heads of state are no longer able to ignore democratic principles without fear of intervention from their neighbors. This was no more apparent than in the constitutional crisis of the Gambia in December 2016, when incumbent President Yahya Jammeh refused to step down after an election loss. The Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, which includes the largest African economy, Nigeria, condemned the actions of Jammeh and demanded that he step down. Although their initial demands went ignored by the president, the African Union announced that they offered their full support for the ECOWAS coalition and coordinated the resolution process with the United Nations. When faced with military occupation by neighboring states that were formally backed by the AU, Jammeh accepted defeat and stepped down in January 2017. This solidarity in the face of blatant despotism sets a precedent for the African Union and sends a strong message to other would-be despots. By providing a single unified voice for the entire continent, the African Union legitimizes democratic processes and reinforces the ability of Africa's many regional blocs, like ECOWAS, to coordinate security measures and maintain stability. The main body for driving security efforts is the African Union's Peace and Security Council, or PSC. Established in 2004, the PSC is a body consisting of 15 elected members and is partially modeled after the United Nations Security Council. One initiative of the Council is the African Peace and Security Architecture, a comprehensive roadmap to end violence and promote peace on the continent that extends to 2020. This ambitious plan seeks to coordinate security measures with regional blocs, combat terrorism like Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and be actively engaged in areas of crisis such as the Congo, South Sudan, and Mali, which are discussed in our 2017 analysis on Africa. There have been positive organizational developments towards security efforts, such as early warning systems for nations at risk of conflict, which represent a more preventative approach to conflict rather than a reactive one. Not only is the Council seeking to prevent conflict, but it is also expanding its operations towards handling post-conflict reconstruction and development. This is a critical factor in maintaining peace and consists of thorough demobilization and disarmament of actors emerging from conflict, while maintaining a consistent collaboration with AU liaisons and regional economic communities. Although the AU has made significant progress towards peace and stability on the continent, one of the biggest challenges they face is the ability to fund all the operations needed. Currently, the Union is heavily reliant on outside funding, which is generally seen as unsustainable in the long term. In response, the AU is pushing towards the goal of being completely self-funded and shedding outside influence. Rwandan President Paul Kagame has been especially vocal about the need for self-funding, and laments the fact that the Union is 97% reliant on outside donors, with less than half of member states paying their dues in full. Kagame has advocated financing the AU through a 0.2% tax levy plan on goods imported from outside the continent, with some exceptions. His reasoning is that, quote, "Once you're the one paying, you automatically become more concerned about getting good value for your money," suggesting that AU member states are not financially invested enough in the Union and should follow Rwanda's lead. Not only does self-financing create a greater sense of involvement for member nations, but it also allows for more reliable and predictable budgeting, the lack of which is a major obstacle for consistently maintaining long-term objectives. Africa's economy is large and diverse, and as such is broken down into regional blocks, known as pillars, which collectively make up the overarching organization called the African Economic Community, or AEC. Created in 1991, the AEC aims to gradually integrate the economy of Africa through multiple stages. The first stages consisted of maintaining existing economic blocks and creating new ones, which have resulted in the myriad of regional communities we have today. The next stages look to build on this foundation by establishing customs unions and free trade areas within all economic regions, followed by the creation of an African common market and an eventual transition into a continent-wide integration of all sectors and the adoption of a single African currency. The AU aims to achieve all these goals by 2034. As of now, progress among the individual regions vary wildly, and together they create a complex web of overlapping communities, organizations, and trade areas. One reason why advancements in free trade are needed is the fact that, of all of Africa's trade, only 12% of it happens within the continent. This is very low compared to that of Asia, which trades around 50% with itself, and Europe, which trades around 70% with itself, and reflects Africa's heavy reliance on the rest of the world. Poor infrastructure inhibits the transportation of goods between African nations, which is crucial considering the fact that much of the African economy relies on exports of raw goods such as oil, metals, and minerals, making it in many cases easier to trade across oceans than across their own borders. This also means that greater incentives for Africans to trade with each other would have the added benefit of encouraging infrastructure development, which would provide jobs and strengthen economies. Landlocked countries deep in sub-Saharan Africa, like the Central African Republic, would benefit especially so from increased trade. Geographically, the African interior makes infrastructure development costly and difficult due to thick rainforests in areas like the Congo and being surrounded by plateaus in the south and east. This harsh terrain, combined with a lack of seaports, means that local trade and infrastructure investments is essential for the overall development of inter-African nations. Africa is a sleeping giant, and the African Union's efforts at creating a more peaceful, stable, and economically united continent will result in massive growth over the next century. By 2050, Africa's population is projected to double from 1.2 to 2.4 billion people and contain 1/4 of the world's population, while its GDP is expected to quadruple from around $2 trillion to $8 trillion. Nigeria alone is even expected to surpass the United States in population within the same time frame. As Africa grows, it will become an increasingly important and influential player on the world stage and will need to have a unified voice if it is to effectively pursue its global interests. The African Union provides both a platform for that voice to be heard and the forum for the international cooperation that will make this growth possible in the first place, driving a collective effort at ensuring security and promoting economic development across the continent. This was a Caspian Report by me, Nathan, the newest member of the Caspian Report team. I'm really excited to be a part of the channel and want to thank our great supporters on Patreon, whose generous contributions allow us to keep expanding and creating more high quality content. If you want to help with the channel and get access to our weekly intel briefings, please visit patreon.com/CaspianReport. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.